Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at what I hope will prove to be a great value for money South Australian red wine. So I have a wine here from a producer called Darrenberg. This is their Stump Jump GSM, so Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre, and this is the 2018 vintage of this wine. So Derelict are very traditional, old producers from the McLaren Vale. The family first came here in the early 20th century when in 1912 Joseph Osborn started planting vines here. Today the estate is run by Chester, who's a fourth generation descendant of Joseph's, and I believe his children are involved in the business as well. Up until 1927 the family were simply growing grapes here, but that's when they built their winery. More recently Chester has done a lot to build the reputation of the winery. He's a very outward going personality and his wines tend to have quirky brand names with peculiar backstories, and they have really quite a large range. There's something like about sort of 60 wines in the range, with quite a broad palette of grape varieties being used in that range as well. Most of these wines have some sort of humorous reference back to local history for the area, and the Stump Jump is just such a brand. Stump Jump brand is a more entry-level brand for them, but it references a plough that was developed in South Australia on the York Peninsula in 1876. Two brothers, Richard and Clarence Smith, invented and perfected a plough where the tines would retract if they came into contact with a stump of wood or presumably rocks as well in the ground, so that they were sprung loaded, and rather than sort of breaking or snagging on obstructions would pull themselves up and then would drop back down again to continue ploughing on the other side of the obstruction. And this became quite revolutionary in terms of clearing land in South Australia and in fact throughout the British Empire. So I suppose actually by referencing a stump jump plough, the Osborns are also making it clear that they're the people who initially cleared these vineyards in the McLaren Vale. But the peculiar backstory is the idea that the inventor had poor eyesight and frequently had to visit the optometrist, and thus the label is designed in such a way that it looks like an eye test. And in fact the back label says that if I can hold the bottle at arm's length and still read the eye test on the label, I'm actually okay to have another glass. So that's handy to know. But it's also worth realising that this is a distinctly McLaren Vale wine. The fruit is sourced there, and the production techniques are very typical for the McLaren Vale. The vineyards here have a maritime climate, and that's cooled by gully winds that come down off Mount Selig, and there's a certain amount of humidity due to proximity to the ocean. The soil types are diverse. Evidently there are marls, there are clays, and there's limestone. Some notes I've seen say the vineyards are certified as being farmed organically and biodynamically. However, I would say there's nothing to testify to that on the label, so I don't know what the reason for that would be. The season leading up to the 2018 vintage had quite an excessively wet winter, a cool spring and early summer, and as a result the development of the fruit was somewhat delayed. However, there was a very warm, dry period in February and March. The grapes were able to catch up, and other than the fact that the crop was perhaps a little lighter in 2018, the fruit had reached good ripeness levels by the time it was harvested. The grapes for this wine are largely coming off old bush vines. The fruit is gently crushed and it's put into open fermenters. These are stainless steel fermenters, so presumably there's temperature control there to prevent excesses of heat. And this enables there to be both punch downs and pump overs to manage the extraction of tannins and colour from the fruit during the fermentation. Also, the point is there's quite a lot of hard work going on here for what is a relatively entry-level wine. It can take quite a bit of work to empty these fermenters into and to put them into the basket presses where pressing goes ahead. The benefit of using a basket press is that you tend to get quite sort of gentle, supple, ripe tannins extract. If used properly, they won't be too astringent. The notes I've seen mention a period of barrel maturation, although they don't specify the size, the type of the oak, the period of aging, or whether all the wine spent time in oak or not. Given the wine's price, I would assume that this has spent a short period in larger barrels, some of which may well have been American oak, but I'm only making that assumption. The blend I've seen noted for this is that it's 46% Grenache, 42% Shiraz, with the remaining 12% being made up of Mourvedre. Now, I have seen other vintages of this that actually, rather than being a GSM, end up as a GMS, so a Grenache, Mourvedre, Shiraz. But no, the proportions are Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre in this one, sort of from the most to the last in the blend. So what those components should give is that the Grenache should give roundness and softness, probably quite reasonable alcohol levels. The wine is labelled as having 14.5% alcohol. The Shiraz should add more structure and spice, and the Mourvedre will give good acidity, good colour, firm tannins, and probably quite a sort of a meaty nature to the mid-palate. So let's have a look at the wine and see what we make of it, shall we? The wine has a pretty good colour. I mean, that's a medium to deep black ruby there. I can just make out the stem of the glass looking through it. As I say, 14.5% alcohol there, and it's very readily throwing tears on the glass there. I have some stains there from the colour when I was swirling it earlier, and yes, that's got good colour. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas have quite a meaty, savoury nature. There's some underlying sort of quite ripe, almost slightly overripe black plum type fruit, and some hints of spice, but those are very much in the background. So let's taste. Tasting that, so the rounded, soft fruit of the Grenache on the front palate is quickly overwhelmed by darker, more black fruit, almost through to a sort of a licoricey concentration. There is this quite meaty and slightly savoury note coming through from the Mourvedre. After that meaty note, there's a delicate, peppery note across the back palate. There's reasonable acidity. I can feel myself salivating there. The wine's a mid-weight with a reasonably good structure, and then there's the sort of the warmth of the alcohol across the back palate, where you're getting that sort of slightly richer, more licoricey note. That acidity I was talking about is leaving the finish quite fresh, despite the warming alcohol. And there, where you've got that sort of warmth at the back palate, there again you're getting that sort of slightly overripe black plum note, almost slightly through to a touch of prune. There's a reasonable length of flavour, but I wouldn't say there was a particularly elegant finish. It's got quite a sort of a four-square, rich, meaty, dark fruit finish that's persisting. I guess the wine is very much in the style of something like a Côte d'Aron, and will almost certainly match a wide variety of richer, dark meat dishes very happily. I certainly don't think this is a wine that needs aging. I think it's probably drinking at its peak at the moment, although it is possible that with a year or so's time, some of that sort of thick, dense, rich, meaty, licoricey notes on the mid palate might actually give way and show a little bit more perfume. Our Wine Searcher aggregated critics score on this gives it an 87 out of 100. I think that's a pretty fair score, given the fact that the wine is actually quite attractively priced. While I would admit that a GSM of this sort is not the style of wine I would necessarily look for, I think the fact that this is a quality example of a wine from the McLaren Vale at this price point is actually quite impressive, and therefore I think it's quite a good example of the sort of wines that D'Arenberg make, offering genuine McLaren Vale character and value for money. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of our tastings, it would be fantastic if you'd consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. If you have any comments you'd like to leave, please pop those in the comments box below. We'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to this. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can find out where in your locality you can buy it and what price it's at. And also the tabs on that page will give you a wealth of information, everything from price history through to the critics reactions to the wine, other users' reactions, and information about the region, the grape varieties, the producer, and some winemaking background there. So hopefully that'll be all the information you could ever need about the Stump Jump Grenache Shiraz Mourvedre from 2018. So thank you once again for joining us, and I do hope that you'll manage to make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the near future. Till then, bye for now.